Hello and welcome to another episode of Political Frenemies. I'm Chris Newton, I'm an academic and a former Tory defence policy advisor. Before I introduce this week's guest, and it's another new guest, I suppose I better introduce my co-host, Lib Dem activist and former councillor, Mathew Hulbert. Hello, Mathew. Another week, another dramatic week in British politics again.
Absolutely, Chris, and it's good to see you. And yeah, we keep thinking that there might be, a quiet week. Well, I think it's yet to happen this year so far. We kind of feel like we've lived a year in politics already, and yet it's only the first week of February. So, but all, as I always say, Chris, this is great grist to the mill for a political podcast like ours.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely no shortage of material, especially in 2026. And so we're just going to keep going. And I mean, who knows what's going to happen sort of in the rest of February. But before we get on to discussing this week's dramatic developments, I'm going to introduce our guest for this week. And it is a Labour affiliate. We used to have a Labour affiliate, but he was made a candidate in Wales. But now we have academic and former Labour advisor Matt Lloyd. Hello, Matt. How are you?
I'm good, thanks very much. We're stuck in the rain up here in Birmingham, where we're filming from. The rest of the country seems to be also stuck in the rain. It sort of represents the politics at the time, I think.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Would you like to sort of introduce yourself? Anything about your research or your career or anything that you think the audience should know?
Yeah, so I am an academic based at Queen Mary University of London and University of Birmingham. My sort of specialty is in the Labour Party, and particularly the major project at the moment is the Labour Party's economic policy. But before I was doing this job, I've worked for a number of Labour MPs. I was a campaign manager for the different parts of the party. I was I was a campaign manager in the People's Vote campaign, and I worked for several centre-left think tanks as well.
Excellent, and this is the ideal week for a Labour.
Not the ideal week. I mean,
not the ideal.
Not the ideal week.
Well, I mean, we've been quite lucky with guests because we had Matthew Goodwin Freeman when the whole generic defection was going on. So we have been lucky in that respect.
Well, can you just thank the person who does the bookings? Oh, that has been me.
Yeah.
And humble too.
I suppose there has to be one thing that you get right.
Ouch! You see. He just can't even let me have that, can he? He just really, really can't. I should just point out that I'm privileged to know Matt a little bit from outside of politics stuff, so church stuff and whatnot. So it's really good to get him on and to talk about politics. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, and what an episode this is going to be, and what a week. We are, of course, devoting this whole episode. I mean, usually we do different topics, but there's only really been one story in town this week. There's been one or two other stories, but they haven't really featured on the radar. It's of course the Epstein Mandelson scandal and the political fallout following from that. And so we'll be discussing whether this is the beginning of the end of Starmer's premiership, as well as the implications for the Labour Party and the other leading political figures. So buckle up, stay tuned, and let's get started. So, newly released documents about Jeffrey Epstein from the US Department of Justice have caused an almighty political storm in the UK. The files include emails and correspondence suggesting that Peter Mandelson, while serving as business secretary in 2009, allegedly shared market-sensitive government information with Epstein, allegations now being assessed by the police. And breaking news for today, the police are now searching 2 of Mandelson's properties. So that's why I'm caveating the last paragraph there, because there's now an ongoing police investigation, and I think that's all we can really say about that. But in the aftermath of these revelations, Mandelson resigned from the Labour Party and stepped down from the House of Lords. The controversy has plunged Keir Starmer into deep political crisis. At Prime Minister's questions, Starmer confirmed that he was aware of Mandelson's relationship with Epstein when appointing him as UK's ambassador to the United States, although he said he didn't know the full extent of those ties. After intense political pressure, including from Angela Rayner, Starmer agreed to the release of documents and handing decisions over what could be made public to the Intelligence and Security Committee. On Thursday, Starmer issued a public apology to the victims of Epstein. So explosive developments, really serious developments. I suppose, I mean, obviously I'm going to turn to Matt with his knowledge and experience of the Labour Party. I feel a bit bad to for inviting you on here and then sort of asking you sort of hostile questions off the bat. But I suppose there's no other way of me putting this other than to say it's been a real disastrous week for Labour. It's been a shambles, and this is going to stick with the public for a long time. So, what's your sort of reactions to the week's developments, and especially Starmer's handling of everything?
So, obviously, the first thing to say, as lots of people are saying, is that obviously the abuse that went on under Epstein is just horrific. I mean, my background is in queer domestic violence, and having survivors not be believed or be downplayed, or essentially having their stories and their experiences gaslighted by both people in the media, powerful people, the police, is sadly very, very common. In terms of then how this has played out into Peter Mandelson's role, it has been, I think it's been a real sort of gut punch to, obviously, like I said, the wider political, in terms of the wider political context, it's been a gut punch. Obviously, nothing compared to what the survivors have gone through. Right. So not to minimise that, but on the political side, it has been quite disastrous. I think it is particularly bad that it's gone to the heart of a figure who has been at the top of Labour Party politics for 30 or 40 years. And given the allegations as well, as you mentioned at the top of the programme, about the alleged market-sensitive leak, it means it feels like history is going to constantly see the new Labour chapter as somewhat associated with what's happened this week, because now every time we teach or anyone reads about the great financial crisis and read about some of the extraordinary and amazing things that people like the amazing late Alistair Darling had to do, who was Chancellor at the time, we're going to be reading that and we're going to be thinking this was around the time that those allegations supposedly happened. So I think it will colour them. I think it was very badly misjudged, and I think it's very clear that lots of people, particularly on the centre-left, because that's where Mandelson was as a key architect, feels like they have been betrayed and the country has been betrayed, and that he's betrayed the party as well. So it has been quite a blow, and I think it's been quite a blow to the government because it's a centre-left government. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. And yes, and again, I'd like to echo what you said about Epstein's victims. It's extremely important that we remember those. But also, we've got to focus on the wider political ramifications as well. So, Mathew, your reaction to that? I mean, this is something that is going to be associated with Labour for a long time. I should imagine.
Absolutely. So a number of things first off the bat. First of all, I really want to thank Matt for coming on when he could have kind of cried off this week, given the news of the week. So I really appreciate him coming on. Secondly, turning to the issue itself, I echo both of you in saying that the people at the top of our minds must be the victims and survivors of this dreadful man, by which I mean Jeffrey Epstein. And quite, this must be re-traumatizing and re-triggering for all of them. So we must remember that. In terms of the politics of this, I mean, there's almost so much to say that you almost hold your head in your hands, quite wondering where to begin. I think there's been a lot said this week about what did Keir Starmer know and when did he know it. And I was watching Prime Minister's Questions, as I always do. I'm sure as probably all three of us do at 12 o'clock on Wednesday. I have to say that actually it took him a few questions to do it from Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader. But to actually hear him say, to actually give, I mean, to be fair to him, was in of itself actually a frank answer, which was, yes, I did know. That Mandelson still had some kind of relationship with Jeffrey Epstein post him being convicted for these terrible, the worst possible crimes that you can think of. And I have to say, to hear him not, I think you could argue that in other senses he a bit obfuscated, but in that one answer, in that one word, yes, I did know, it kind of hit me like a gut punch, a shot to the head, because I thought, oh my goodness, that one word, that yes, is going to have massive ramifications for him and his leadership. Now, you may say that in that sense he was honest when he didn't perhaps absolutely need to be in that moment, and perhaps for that he should be given credit. But I think he came to realise in the hours following that, and when he sought to clarify that remark at his speech the next day, that really that admission could get him into, politically at least, could get him into quite serious trouble, and that a number of his backbenchers are absolutely outraged that Peter Mandelson was still appointed given that. But I should also say, Chris, and I can't speak for you because you probably said something different, but I think on this podcast at the time, if we probably look back to when he was appointed, I think I probably said that it was a good appointment. I think I probably did. I've not checked, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if I said that, despite being a controversial figure, as he pretty much always has been, that actually, he's a former trade secretary, he's a former EU commissioner. This is someone that I think could probably charm Donald Trump, which is what was needed. I'm sure that I probably said at the time that this was a good appointment. And I think lots of the journalists that are getting very excited about all of this this week and having a bit of a holier-than-thou attitude, I'm sure a good number of them, if you went back and checked their broadcasting and their writing back then, also probably said that this was a good appointment. And I think you can get a bit wise after the event with some of these things. And I guess that makes me at least have some kind of sympathy, isn't the right word, is it? But understanding, perhaps, of how Keir Starmer ended up in the position that he did. That it's kind of baked in that there's controversy with Peter Mandelson, but actually they clearly felt that even over and above that, that it was worth taking this risk. Now, of course, the gamble has not paid off, because even though you could argue that during the few months he was in the actual office, could be argued he did a good job. The fact is the wider context now has totally drowned that. That's blown that out of the water. And so, I think we're left in a situation where, and again, you can have hyperbole, can't you, in political commentary, but I do genuinely think, as we sat here tonight, Keir Starmer is fighting for his political life, and he's fighting for his prime ministership. And in a sense, yes, of course, people in the public will be outraged with what they're seeing and hearing, but for the moment, at least, they're not his primary concern. His primary concern are the people sat behind him, the Labour backbenchers, who ultimately have the power between elections to get rid of him. And so I'm sure there's lots of conversations going on right as we're sat here recording this between Labour MPs and others, deciding what, if anything, their next step should be. So I think we can be wise after the event, but do I think this is a political crisis for Keir Starmer? It clearly is.
Don't you think, Matthew, that when he said he knew at the PMQs, and I agree with you, that seems to be quite a focal point for politics this week, but don't you think he was just admitting what, I mean, I wasn't aware of it at the time, but it was all public, it was public knowledge. The FT had been pushing it, and I read yesterday that they'd been pushing the fact that Peter Mandelson had stayed at Epstein's properties, including while he was in prison and after convictions. And then also, like I was saying, last 2023, I think Bloomberg published something which also brought more depth to the relationship, based on an internal investigation at the is it JP Morgan?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Trying to get the wrong company. So there was sort of public information out there. So to a certain extent, like, surely Starmer was just answering what everyone knew, which was everyone had known this. The journalists had known this if they were following the news and the FT. So it was just sort of admission.
I think that's right, but I think there was something about the bluntness with which he answered it that just caught people, that made people shocked, even though perhaps we shouldn't have been shocked. And so, I guess the question then is that it seems to be that the judgment was that, it's baked in that there's controversy about Peter Mandelson, and yet people know that, I think the line that Starmer was, Peter's Peter, which I think is kind of a line that Blair has used in the past, and that. I just wonder. So they did the original kind of bit of vetting, which I gather is literally kind of looking at doing a Google search. Then they make an initial appointment. Then there's much further, much deeper vetting that goes on. And then apparently he was asked. Reportedly, according I think to the New Statesman this week, Mandelson says that he was asked three questions. Three questions, Mandelson says he was. And by the way, I am going to call him Peter Mandelson, because another thing that I wanted to raise was that this whole thing this week, this Mandelson thing, where people are trying to make it sound as if they barely knew him, Keir Starmer, West Streeting, and others, I personally think makes them sound ridiculous. Let's use his full name. It's Peter Mandelson, right? Okay. So
I think that might possibly be because they used to call him Lord Mandelson, and they've purposefully dropped the Lord, so they're left with Mandelson.
Yeah, I understand that, but it also makes it, to my ears at least, I can't speak for anyone else, but hearing, West Streeting and others, and Starmer himself and others talk about him as if almost non-personing him, and I'm sure that's deliberate. They do want to non-person him. He has become a political non-person this week. But I just think it makes, especially the likes of West Streeting, sound ridiculous because he was a protege of Peter Mandelson, and trying to pretend that you haven't had this long history with him, and there's no guilt by association. I should make that absolutely clear. But I'm just saying that trying to pretend that you kind of don't really know this person or have had very little to do with them makes them sound a bit ridiculous.
I think amongst the party, he tended to be known notoriously as Mandelson.
Okay,
Mandelson, or Mandy, as some people would call him. And again, I wouldn't want to answer for Wes, but I'm not sure he would put himself down as a protege of Mandelson.
Really?
Again, I think it's I think it's just sort of fellow travellers on the centre left. I think people involved in the New Labour programme have been involved in resisting Corbyn, and then building Starmer and building it into a government, and that requires people from all sorts of figures from New Labour who've been involved in that, particularly in the Lords, actually.
Sure, and obviously, this is why it's good to have you on, because you know better than me or Chris on this, because we're obviously from different parties and different traditions. But yeah, just going back to my earlier point. So apparently, according to Peter Mandelson, according to the New Statesman, he was asked 3 questions, and he says he replied honestly to those questions. Though there's a little bit of a he says thing going on, and obviously at the moment we don't know the truth of that because the documents are yet to be released, and we'll come on, I'm sure, in a second. I'm sure Chris will want us to come on to the Tories week in reaction to this and how they've moved things along, which, to be fair to them, I think they have. It's been one of Kemi Badenoch's better weeks. But if that's right, that he was asked 3 questions, number one, I mean, I'm sure we'd all absolutely love to know what those 3 questions were, and whether they were questions which could be answered, quote in quotes, truthfully, but still not have the full detail divulged, because some questions you can, that can be the case. And so we just don't know. Then you get into the whole thing that, and I'm not a big fan actually of having advisors be made scapegoats, because I think it was Margaret Thatcher who said it, and she was quite right, that advisors advise and ministers decide, and that's quite right. But equally, it has been reported a lot this week that the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, lobbied very heavily for Peter Mandelson to become US ambassador. I gather that he hadn't been on the original list, and then on a later list, when it was clear that Trump had won the last US election, that actually there was a number of people on the list, 2 politicians, one of which was Peter Mandelson, another of which, interestingly, actually was George Osborne, which would have been an interesting appointment in of itself, and probably a slightly less controversial one than Peter Mandelson, but still a bit controversial. And Mandelson, obviously. Sorry?
In retrospect, perhaps.
Well, indeed.
Sure. I think, given the calculation and what we knew at the time, having George Osborne as brought in, I think that would have raised a lot of eyebrows and upset quite a few people in the Labour Party due to their politics.
Sure.
So it sort of links into, like, if you are Morgan McSweeney, and I worked with Morgan at Lambeth, why would you not fight for someone who, as you said yourself, Mathew, was a really effective EU commissioner, effective cabinet member, has got most of the political calls. Clearly terrible personal judgment, but most of the political calls for the party correct over the last 30, 40 years. So why would you not say we should be thinking outside the box? I mean, even having George Osborne on there shows that they were thinking outside the box. So, yeah.
But hasn't that always been the issue with Peter Mandelson? Is that and obviously, if you're from a different wing of the Labour Party, I'm sure you disagree with this point anyway. But you could theoretically argue, at least, that he was effective in helping to modernise the party, helping to professionalise its communications, to get it into government and all the rest of it. But that personally, his judgment arguably has always been lacking. And I can remember back to the first sacking over the Jeffrey Robinson house loan, and then there was the Hinduja brothers thing. No, I think he was found in some of those cases not actually to have done. Yeah, I think he was found in some of the cases not to have done anything actually wrong. But there's always kind of been a lingering thing that this guy does not have good judgment, number one, and number two, that he seems to really like very, 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 very rich people. Now, there's nothing in theory wrong with that, but I guess the question then is to what that leads you to do, and if it leads you to do things which aren't correct. And that is what is being looked at now, I guess.
I think there's also the potential that even the information we have could get worse. Because, I mean, I was talking earlier, was it last week when they first came out? So last Friday, I was talking to one of the special advisors in the Labour Party, and I was saying that having read a lot of the emails that were coming out and seen a lot of the photos, and again, it's not to minimise what Mandelson did. He has his own agency, but it felt like I was reading a case study of an abusive relationship, where, like, if you look at some of the emails where suddenly Mandelson, who, you know, I think even his enemies would say were very strong, forthright, was suddenly asking for permission from Epstein in some of these emails. There seems to be like weird emotional control, which again you get in an abusive relationship where, Epstein was saying, well, you don't do anything for me. And you just sit there, well, allegedly he's been doing this for you. So that's pretty big. And then also you have these photographs where the photographs are weird because a lot of them are like, why would you take that photo? Why would you take this photo where Mandelson is in his briefs or whatever, and standing in a random room with a woman looking at an iPad? Like, why would you take that photo other than, I also think the same thing for the hot tub with the former President Clinton. Why would you take that photo unless you wanted to have some sort of material on the person? And I also think, like, in all these photos, Epstein seems perfectly clothed, perfectly there's always like Mandelson, like in his gown, possibly having got out of the shower or from the swimming pool or whatever. So, like, it's sinister that they have that. And then you've got the money angle now, which is coming in, another sort of layer that you have to abusive relationships and supporting his now husband. So you've got this weird sort of relationship that seems strange. And then the BBC has now been floating, and I see that Poland is now going to investigate as to whether Epstein may have links to Russia, because a lot of things that I just described, and as the BBC pointed out, the way that they were catalogued is very similar to the compromat strategy that Russian agents use to compromise politicians and rich individuals. There's also questions as to, like, where did Epstein get this money from? I mean, how do you get enough money to buy an island, firstly? I mean, his career wasn't that successful, so that raises questions. Also, it seems that lots of these vulnerable survivors seem to have been coming from Russia, which also raises questions. And then this links back to the idea that people have been saying that this is as big as the Profumo scandal, and if you do bring the Russian government into it, or they have some role in it, then you've got every single possible thing you can think of for a very large scandal.
Absolutely, and I'm sure Chris will want to come in just a second, but I just want to raise a couple of quick points whilst they're on my mind. Firstly, it was I thought a number of party leaders actually had good PMQs on Wednesday. I thought Kemi Badenoch did. I mean, it was a pretty open goal for her, but she, as Chris will tell you, she doesn't always take those when she has them. But she did this week, and she got that admission out of Starmer. I thought my party leader had a good week this week, and he brought in that whole Russian spy element as well. And I thought the Plaid leader also had a very effective question to the Prime Minister, and I thought by the end that, you know, that famous phrase that Starmer was drowning, not waving. You know, he looked really in trouble, and I think we can't always see like the faces of the backbenchers, but from the glimpses that you could get, I mean, they were not happy. I mean, this was not a happy parliamentary Labour Party, and you obviously understand why. So that's point one. And then just very quickly, I mean, a number of people, clearly not just Peter Mandelson, others as well, including his husband, it has to be said, appear to use Epstein as like a cash point. That, like, Like, pressed for money to come out, and money came out. And I've just never, I mean, certainly, as someone who obviously doesn't, has never been involved in these kind of verified world, I mean, the idea that you could have someone that you could just do that to, especially someone outside of your own family or own vicinity, that please send me some money, and have them say to their accountant, yes, send this person $12,000 a month. I mean, I've never known anything like that. It's weird, to say the very least. So yeah, I just wanted to get those 2 points in, Chris.
Yeah, and also just to respond to you with regards to especially the PMQ points, and perhaps we can return to Labour sort of afterwards. And I would agree with you in terms of how the opposition parties handled that. I think it goes to show what can be achieved from an opposition point of view if all of the main opposition parties are pursuing that one issue. And we've discussed many times before, Mathew, about Badenoch, not scoring open goals. She did. She delivered big time this week, but also Ed Davey following up as well. We never get a sort of a tag team between Badenoch and Davey, but that happened this week. He really effectively, and this is probably the only time I'm going to be, praiseworthy of Davey, but he really did follow up Badenoch, and he asked her. I felt that question about did Starmer think about the victims? That was a really sort of piercing question, and Savile Roberts did her bit as well. So again, it just goes to show that Prime Minister's questions, most of the time it doesn't matter, but on the really big occasions it really does matter, and that's what I've been trying to say to people who've been having a go at me when I've been criticising Badenoch. I'm saying, well, actually, you can actually use it effectively to cause some real damage to the government. Any comments on the opposition, Matt?
I was just going to say, with Badenoch, she could have done it a lot earlier. I think if she had played it better, I think she could have, back in the autumn, I think she could have got all this out into the open and provide a lot more pressure at that point. So it feels like there's been an open goal there for a while, and they almost let the issue sort of decline. I mean, like I said, there's possibly even more. I think there is also the issue that now the opposition have raised it. There is the issue that of time. So they're saying now that there could possibly be hundreds of thousands of documents and WhatsApp messages and everything to go to the committee, which then have to review it all. They don't think they have the resources to review it all. So that's going to take a while. And then you've also got the issue of, Mathew was mentioning backbenchers, but at the moment we've only really had backbenchers who have been critical of Starmer before come out and say it's time to go. I mean, I think it's quite funny watching suddenly lots of these, the BBC and Sky News and others are sort of picking up these very left-wing MPs who have been criticising Starmer all year and sort of putting them on the TV at prime time and sort of pretending as if they're the spokesperson for all the backbenchers suddenly now, when they're basically almost saying the same things that they've been saying for the last year. So, I think it's... but saying that, I think Badenoch did have a good PMQs, very similar to when she had the response to Rachel Reeves, which was another good outing for her. And as you've covered in previous episodes, I think it actually helps that people are leaving to reform. I'm definitely of that opinion, because if Badenoch takes it as a opportunity to bring it back to the party, back to the centre-right, and focus on the economy and economics and a liberal society, then I think she could capture lots of the people who are up for capturing as reform ascends.
So Matt, can I ask you a couple of questions, kind of Labour-focused questions, which obviously it'd be good to get your perspective on. So I think I heard in an earlier answer that you I don't know, kind of for how long this was or whatever, but that you I think I heard you say that you worked a little bit with Morgan McSweeney. Is that right?
Yeah, so Morgan was, I was the campaign manager for Lambeth for 2.5 years, 3 years, and that used to be his job way back when, and he was my mentor at the time.
And so, can you just let us into his character a little bit? I mean, it's difficult when obviously it's someone that basically isn't ever on the broadcast media, and yet is the constant focus of attention quite a lot of the time. I mean, what sort of guy is he?
What sort of guy is he? I think he's just, well, he's highly intelligent, highly driven, knows what it takes to get the Labour Party elected. I think you've seen that. He's a sort of very ruthless electoral strategist, and yeah, I think the way he's sort of perceived is sort of that is him. He lives and breathes politics and is very good at following through. And I mean, thinking back to when when the party had Corbyn, and it looked like there was no way we'd be getting back into government for the next 10 years. I mean, it was Morgan who delivered for Labour. There would not be a Labour government without Morgan. You would not have probably a centre-left leader after Corbyn without Morgan. So yeah.
And so knowing him a little bit as you do, how do you think you would have coped with this week?
I mean, I don't think I'd be able to answer. I haven't really, like I said, I knew him before his government days, so I wouldn't know in terms of how he's coped this week. But like I said, he knows politics well. He knows where the Labour Party needs to be in order to win elections.
And just on McSweeney, and I take your point about McSweeney's abilities. Everybody sort of speaks sort of highly of him, but of course, I mean, it's not just been this week. The whole sort of Labour period in government, including when sort of McSweeney took over as chief of staff, has not been great. Let's put it that way. Do you think it's a case of, like Dominic Cummings and other figures like that, in the sense that these people are brilliant campaigners, they're brilliant at doing elections, but when it comes to government, it's a different skill set. It requires a different kind of person, and that's what's ultimately sort of has gone wrong here. That ultimately brilliant election campaigners don't, most of the time, they don't translate into effective administrators in government.
So I wouldn't agree with that. I think that is placing too much agency on certain people. I think there are wider structures. I think the problem at the moment is things like it's hard to govern right now. And that's not just in the UK. Like this idea of the thing that everyone's talking about currently at the University of Birmingham is the idea that this advantage of being an incumbent government that you used to have, if you were in government, you could adjust policy, and it tended to mean that you were more likely to win an election, has just seems to have gone. And that, like I said, that's not just in Britain, but that seems to be across a lot of established economies, democracies at the moment. I think in terms of like the project that they had, one, they have a majority, they have a huge majority, and two, at the start when people were complaining about, the tough economic decisions they were trying to make physically, again, that is an understanding that the Labour Party is constantly having to make sure that they reassure the electorate and market actors that they have control of the economy and that they are competent with it, because historically it has always been the thing that has killed Labour governments, which is why it was good, I think, that we demonstrate, the party demonstrates physical restraint and shows that resources aren't just unlimited. So that was good. And then also the welfare the welfare reforms. Now, there is a problem in welfare. I don't know. There are different ways as to and different opinions as to how you change welfare to make it more sustainable. But it can't be that having 1,000 people sign up every day for PIP is sustainable, and the government's got the same problem with SEND education at the moment. But again, on welfare, it's one of the weakest points that kills Labour governments and Labour's chances at elections. So some of those difficult things that I think you were sort of alluding to when you said it hadn't gone swimmingly. I think some of them, the motivations are the correct ones. The decisions are, that actually we do need to be good on the economy, and you need to be trusted on welfare in order to make it sustainable, particularly for Labour.
Can I move on to later on Wednesday when the Tories used this parliamentary vehicle called the humble address? This was in regards to trying to get the government to be able to release everything that it could possibly release. The government obviously put down an amendment to that, but it's really interesting that Angela Rayner made an intervention to say that the amendment wasn't really good enough, and I think she proposed that I think I'm right in saying that the Intelligence and Security Committee be the ones to decide kind of what gets released and what doesn't. I mean, her intervention is interesting, isn't it? She doesn't pop up all that often now, but is normally quite effective, arguably, when she does pop up.
Yeah. So and that leads us back to the welfare vote as well. So, which is where I think this has become the government in particular has become unstuck. There's clearly been a breakdown between Number 10 and the PLP, and the PLP clearly do not believe that the government have a vision which has to both be political. A political vision for campaigning, but also governing. So, part of my work was to look at different Labour Party leaders from New Labour to Starmer. So I interviewed all these different people as part of my research. And it's very clear that New Labour had really intelligent people who understood the need to deliver on the economy and to deliver policy, but they also worked in tandem with a campaign team who were able to sell it and have a vision. So when New Labour had difficult decisions to make, the PLP felt like, well, these are difficult decisions. However, I feel like there is a plan here and we've got a direction where we're going, and they've got a way of winning. Whereas that doesn't seem to have happened now at Number 10. I don't think that's Morgan's fault. I do think possibly it's the nature of Starmer, that he's come from outside politics and doesn't really realise that he needs to maintain this bridge. But that bridge collapsed, I would argue, during the welfare vote. And whether you blame the rebels or Number 10 or both, at that point the credibility was in danger. And that's why we've now entered a situation whereby if there is any sense of a rebellion, Number 10 seems to have to double back because they don't know their numbers. And you're now in the situation where, people like Angela Rayner are able to stand up and essentially write government strategy from the House of Commons, which is not great. What the government needs to do is make sure that they have a route back for MPs who criticise them, and basically say, that there is a way back to us having a productive working relationship again.
And Chris, can I ask you, from a Conservative perspective? I mean, as I say, I'm prepared to say that I think Badenoch had a good week, and I think she scored goals and she helped move the debate, and so I'm absolutely prepared to say that. How does she keep that momentum going? I mean, what do the Tories? Are there other parliamentary instruments, things that the Tories can do to really try and push this along?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing now is to keep up the momentum. I suppose the other question is whether she can translate this into any real difference in the polls. I think at the very least it might cause a few people to have another look at her. Again, it's another thing that I've been arguing with regards to PMQs. It's an opportunity to get your name out there and to make people sort of take another look at you. What's also interesting this week is Farage has said a few things about this, but he hasn't, he hasn't really made the weather. He hasn't really kind of pushed this, certainly not in the way in which the Conservatives have. And that's interesting. Whether that will have any, well, firstly, why, is it a Farage thing or a Reform Machine thing? I have no idea.
Well, he is named in the files too, right? Nigel
Yeah,
Farage.
yeah.
Yeah.
Although I think in the third person in relation to the fact, well, I think Farage is leading the campaign against the EU or something like that.
Right.
But it's interesting that they, at the start of the Parliament they were absolutely out there, with energy, and now they've kind of pulled back a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see if that kind, if that makes any difference in the polls, or whether people are now, especially, or whether this scandal actually reinforces this notion that among the people that, the Uni Party, they're all the same, they're all kind of up to all of this nonsense, so we'll go with reform. But of course the Conservatives and Reform, they will no doubt keep picking away at this, seeing if there's any more that can be found, using kind of all of the instruments that they can, opposition day debates, motions and so forth. But it's one thing to do that. It's quite another to do what she did this week. It's quite another now to translate that into political capital. And this leads to my question about kind of the future and the immediate future and what happens next, and especially with Starmer. Now, Starmer's explanation and Starmer's kind of actions sort of this week. There's the kind of the real kind of honest statement, as we mentioned at Prime Minister's questions, but then there are other elements where he's kind of reverted back to the kind of the lawyers' kind of obfuscation, especially in relation to. And some of the lines that Starmer has, especially in that speech that he did yesterday on Thursday about, well, Starmer, Mandelson lied to me, I was following the evidence. That kind of goes against what we were originally told about Starmer, that he was this super duper lawyer who, forensically goes, goes through everything with a fine tooth comb. So firstly, how sustainable is that kind of, well, I asked Mandelson, he said no, and that was it. How sustainable is that line? And I suppose the other kind of, major question that we've kind of skirted round and now perhaps we should address is how long does Starmer have? Is there any way in which he can salvage this? Are we still, if not, are we still talking about the May elections, or are we talking about before that now, Matt?
So I think it's hard to say with on Starmer's judgment. Like what his calculation was. So he needs to make clear what his calculation was, and he needs to explain it, because at the moment he's having lots of other people fill in what that possible calculation is. So there's been some accusations from some Labour MPs talking about at the debate, talking about how did Starmer believe that, well, he did have this friendship, but it was worth the risk, which is what also sort of Mathew was implying at the start of the episode. It's like, was that the calculation or not? Starmer needs to be able to answer that and answer it clearly, which I think Harriet Harman was sort of telling him to do, but didn't do in a particularly helpful way, perhaps, when she was criticising him yesterday. And I think, the other thing is, I think they should override what the police have advised. I think the police often advise, so they've advised that you can't publish lots of the documents at the moment because there's an investigation into the alleged market-moving leaks. And the police tend to be quite conservative with all of this stuff, particularly when they don't know what's going on. So they tend to try and just say, look, we're just going to stop all of it. But I think what the government needs to do is they need to override that in the interest of the public. I don't think they're going to be publishing anything that impacts what Mandelson was talking about in 2009, 2008. I think, and if they are, there must be lots of stuff that they can publish. So I think the government needs to get everything out. They need to get out now, and then Starmer needs to explain what his calculation was, because at the moment it's just people guessing what his possible calculation was, or they're guessing, like just saying, well, this advisor must have pulled the strings or whatever. Like, we need to hear from him what happened, and then once we see the evidence as well, we'll be able to tell, well, was he lied to? Was, maybe he did question him further. Was Starmer even involved heavily within the vetting process? I assume not, given how busy prime ministers tend to be. And then how long does Starmer have? Well, I think, I don't think it's news that lots of the PLP have been talking about it, lots of the media have been talking about it, and like with every leader, you'll be judged against whether you can deliver for your party and for the government. And so, again, I'm not Mystic Meg, but we're probably looking towards May, possibly, because that's when we'll find out how the Labour Party is doing actually on the doorsteps. And given the fact that we've been told that there's thousands and hundreds of thousands of documents to be processed, I don't think there's going to be a quick answer to this, unless, like I said, they override what the police are saying and just push out as much as they can.
Would you agree with that, Mathew, or will the political pressure? We've got the Gorton and Denton by-election as well. Will the political momentum and pressure be too much by May?
Well, I get the impression, I've obviously never met Keir Starmer, so I'm totally going on things that are reported, but I get the impression that he's not one to just kind of give up on things. But isn't it amazing that we're talking in this way about a prime minister only 18 months into office having won a massive majority just 18 months ago? Now, you can say that was more a vote against the Tories than a vote for Labour, but nonetheless, he secured that majority. He took the party from opposition into government, which is obviously a very tough thing to do. And yet we're now in a situation where, there's a stench of death around this government. It feels like it's on its last legs. Now, partly that is, a lot of the decisions that it's made and the fact that, as Matt quite rightly says, and as we've said on this podcast before, there's no overriding sense of vision. And, I think Matt's right. Whether you agree with the new Labour vision or you didn't, the fact is you felt that there was a vision. And so I think most of their backbenchers back then were prepared to say, well, we might not like this particular decision, but we know on the road on which we're travelling. I don't think Starmer has set, or his government has set that out. And again, as I've said on this pod before, and as others have said elsewhere, from what I gather, Starmer hates the politics of politics. Well, I just don't think you can do that job and hate the politics of politics. I get the impression with Starmer that he thinks things should be run like you'd run a corporation, or maybe like you'd run a law firm. What a pain in the neck that I have to worry about my backbenchers, and that I have to worry about what the media is saying, and that, well, that's politics, mate. I don't quite know what industry he thought he would, what profession he thought he was getting into. So I don't think that helps him, and he sometimes looks a little bit like, I just don't understand what's going on here, kind of thing. I think he needs to seek advice with that, because politics is what it is. It's like no other kind of profession in the world, and so I'm just amazed that we're talking like this after less than 2 years of a brand new what was a brand new shiny new government. So there's obviously several
massive majority as well.
Well, indeed, there's obviously several points of danger. There's Gorton and Denton, which I don't think anyone believes that Labour is going to win. There's obviously the May elections, when it looks like They won't win Scotland. That for the first time ever, they won't win Wales. They could be totally locked out of government in Wales, depending on what the numbers are. So there might not even be the minority party of government in Wales. And then it looks like in the elections that they are allowing to go ahead across England, they'll be trounced in them as well. Now, I keep hearing from some political pundits that, that's all baked in. Well, it can be as baked in as it wants to be, but when May 7th arrives, and if that is all the case, don't pretend to me that you can just say, it's all baked in. No, Labour MPs will be absolutely incandescent about that, I'm sure. And then, obviously, overhanging all of that now, is this with Mandelson and all of that and what is yet to come? And I'm sure that members of the Fourth Estate, especially for the Sunday papers, are beavering away right now, and who knows what revelations we've still got to come. So I mean, part of me almost feels sorry for Keir Starmer, because I just don't know. I feel like he must be bunkered down in number 10, not quite knowing what to do. But he needs some advice, some good advice, pretty quickly, I think. And I mean, I know some people have said, maybe if he has a change of personnel at number 10, that could do it. Well, I mean, I just don't think that is good enough at this time. I mean, I also think as well that rather a bit like Starmer has tied himself to Rachel Reeves, and therefore if he got rid of her, he'd kind of in a sense be getting rid of him himself. I think the same is true with Morgan McSweeney as well, that they're too closely tied together, that within pretty short order after getting rid of McSweeney, Starmer would have to go. So, I mean, I think he's in a real bind that I don't know how he gets himself out of. And someone else said this week those famous lines from Norman Lamont in the early 90s to John Major, and in reference to the Major government, which by that point Lamont had left, which is in office but not in power. And it's starting to really feel like that with this administration. So, and I'll be absolutely honest, and Chris will back me up on this, that, I'm not Labour. I'm obviously a Lib Dem, but I genuinely said at the time, and Chris told me I was wrong at the time, but I didn't like to believe it, that I'm
always right.
Always right. The Tories, that Labour, the adults were back in charge, and that we were going to get sensible, competent government. And it's pretty difficult to argue that is what we've got. And so, in a sense, I'm very saddened, because the country definitely needed change after 14 years. But my worry is, going back to your point on reform, Chris, and then I'll shut up. No, they've not had a lot to say this week. It hasn't been one of their better weeks. But I think a lot of people will still think at the end of this week, in terms of the main parties, a pox on all your houses. And we want to kick the establishment, and we can best do that by voting reform. And I think we'll see that in May.
I think that the fundamentals remain, though, right? So, they still have a big majority. They can, and I would disagree. I think that there have been good things, and good things are happening in government where the adults have returned. I think you do have good, effective ministers that we haven't had before. I do think Wes Streeting's doing a good job driving through health policy and service reform in NHS. I do think Peter Carl did an excellent job in attracting foreign direct investment from, particularly from the technology sector, and has gone on to be the business secretary. I think there are good things. Again, whether you agree with her or not, Shabana Mahmood does seem to have managed to grasp the Home Office in a fairly effective way politically, and then we'll see whether she's managed to do it in a policy way as policy unfolds. And that does seem to have blunted some of the reform attacks, and there does seem to be more sort of confidence in taking on reform and immigration since Shabana's taken on that role. So I think there are adults in the room. I think the problem is that it's okay to have a prime minister or any leading politician, as we say, when I used to train politicians for selections and elections, and it's absolutely fine to have weaknesses or to not know what you're good at, but you just, the best politicians know what they're not good at, and they acknowledge it, and then they have people who are good at that. And I think to a certain extent, that has happened with Starmer, which is how we've ended up with Peter Mandelson, which is part of Patrick Maguire's theory of it all, which is that basically they have they subcontracted a lot of the work out to Peter Mandelson, and now Starmer is left to pay the bill. But I think that you need a better team in terms of you need a better team that can fill those spaces that you're not very good at. So they desperately need someone who is able to build that bridge between the PLP and between Number 10, between Number 10 and the Labour Party, to try and keep it all together. Because, like I said, the fundamentals are there, that they have a majority, they have service reform that they could be doing. There isn't a competent economic policy that they could be following. But right now, because that relationship has been broken between the PLP and Number 10, you are having the economic policy just at almost most policy, again, except for some of those areas where I think there is a vision, whether you agree with them or not. A lot of the measures are now being written from the House of Commons floor by Labour MPs.
Thanks very much for your contributions today, Matt. I think you've been absolutely brilliant, and I think your perspective is a perspective that this podcast really needed, actually, because Mathew kept complaining every single week. Well, we keep attacking the government every week, but we didn't have anybody to not necessarily defend it, but to give the Labour perspective, and I think you did that very well. Thanks very much, Matt.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
And certainly, I was just going to say that, as long as you're happy to, obviously, that, we'll definitely love to have you back on. We've got some really interesting people coming up. I think I'm, with a few exceptions, I think I'm almost booked up to almost kind of mid-April now, so it's good that we're getting people on. Some of those will be returning people, some of those will be new voices like Matt, but yeah, what we really like is, and we think we're just about the only political podcast that does this. Yes, me and Chris are on all the time as the co-host, but we think we're pretty much the only podcast that has such a wide range of voices, from like reform people to your party people and all the way kind of in between. So we hope it makes it interesting for our audience. And I'm sure that Chris would want me to say, please do all the internety things. Please like, please subscribe, please follow us on X at Frenemies. This is going to be an amazingly busy political year. Just to say that if something major does happen in the next 7 days, and who knows, after the past week, it could be a quiet week, but I doubt it. If something major happens, then me and Chris may well do a mini ep. So do always subscribe to the feeds and look out for that. But if not, Chris, we're back next week.
Yes, indeed. And yeah, we'll be back next week. Who knows what we'll be discussing this time next week. But I hope you've enjoyed the episode today, and we'll see you again next time on Political Frenemies.